How do you do, ladies and gentlemen? What's the real truth about Citizen Kane?
It'll probably turn out to be a very simple thing.
Hey everybody, hope you're doing well. I'm Parker.
And I'm Max.
And welcome back to another episode of Better Than Citizen Kane, the highly subjective show where we look at a movie and ask that titular question. Because when every movie ever made is a reasonable contender for the title of greatest film of all time, you have to wonder, better than Citizen Kane?
This week, we're joined by a friend of the show, one of the most talented writers I know, and co-director of his recent short film Mop Monster, Brogan Luke Bouwhuis. Brogan, welcome, and tell us a little bit about why you chose Godzilla 1954 for this show.
I chose Godzilla specifically because I genuinely do believe Citizen Kane is one of the greatest films of all time, and Godzilla is one of the few that I think can hold a candle in all aspects, and in entertainment, in historical significance. It's one of the few films that I would put up there with Citizen Kane. So when you're talking as far as like what's better than Citizen Kane, this is one of the few that I would actually mention in the conversation.
Wonderful. And this is big. I noticed you used some of the wording that we use in our criteria. That's because, Brogan, correct me if I'm wrong, you listen to the show.
I do listen to the show. I'm a big fan of the show.
Oh, we weren't visiting for that, but thank you.
One of us was.
But I bring it up because I think there's been a few episodes now where Parker and I will talk about Citizen Kane. You know, that's what we've set up this show to do. And I will be like, yeah, and a friend of mine recently pointed this out about Citizen Kane to me. And it's like 99% chance it's Brogan.
Oh yeah. Also when Max is like, yeah, someone cornered me at a party and yelled at me about Citizen Kane. That's also me. I also did that.
Yeah.
So
secrets revealed.
It's
I appreciate you mentioning the nicer moments. Sometimes you'll talk about our conversations on the show and I'll be like, is that how it came across? And then I feel bad.
No, I've only ever been thrilled to hear from you about Citizen Kane and about this show, because I do think it's important to have someone on who is, like very adamant about Citizen Kane's position and is knowledgeable enough to really kind of talk about it. And so I'm super glad that you're here, basically, is what I wanted to lead into. I think what we should do is probably hear from you first on why you think Citizen Kane is deserving of its title, and kind of your history with Citizen Kane, and then also your history with Godzilla. Does that sound good, Parker? Does that sound good, Brogan?
Yeah, that works for me.
Okay, great.
Sounds great.
Great.
So I am... my history with Citizen Kane, I am kind of the cliche that did not watch Citizen Kane until I was in a film class, which I know a lot of people are like that. A lot of people don't watch Citizen Kane until they're in the film class, and then they're like, this is boring. And I was the complete opposite. I was like one of two guys in the class that was like, this is an incredible movie. And then I started reading about it in the history of the film and how, not permanently, but this film was a scathing enough rebuke that it changed the American public's perception of fascism for multiple decades. Unfortunately, I don't think it was a permanent switch, but this did take a country that was up to the start of World War II like largely pro-fascist, and it made that whole thing seem gross, and it made a lot of billionaires feel miserable, and changed how we perceive class in this country. And I think that there is a lot of value, and I think a lot of positive impact that has come out as a direct result of Citizen Kane. And we don't talk about that because we're terrible at teaching the history of this country. So we come in and they're like, oh, like it invented this shot. And like, sure, but that's like so small on the list. So kind of digging in deeper into the film, because I at first really enjoyed the film, and then coming up for air with like knowing the the full historical significance of it. And I just I love the film, and I think it's one of the most important films ever made. At the very least, one of the most important American films ever made. I think it's hard to find a film that is as significant in its impact of the American public. And even if that didn't last like I would have liked it to, I think it's an incredible film, and I just I love it a lot, and I feel weird, and I don't think most people not liking it. I don't think it's their fault. I think we don't teach it in a proper, honest way, the significance. So I don't begrudge anyone that doesn't like it. My wife doesn't like Citizen Kane, but I think it's an incredible film. I think it's one of the most incredible films.
Fantastic.
Strong argument.
I think so too. I think it's very important to note that. So when did you see Godzilla for the first time, would you say?
I saw Godzilla for the first time when I was like 5. This is the complete opposite. I, in kindergarten, had a friend who I went over to his house once, and his dad was watching a bunch of like Godzilla films on VHS. And it was all like the cheesy American dubs that are often completely lose sight of the point of the film. So I fell in love with Godzilla at a very young age, and I, as a kid, was going and I was getting all of the films. I was excited when the terrible Roland Emmerich Godzilla film came out in the late 90s. I was like, this is great. And then it wasn't very good, but then Godzilla 2000 came out, and I was like, I'm going to watch the American dub of that on VHS as soon as it hits my local library. So I fell in love with that one at a very young age. I didn't, I think, come to appreciate it as much artistically until later, because until I was like late teens, only watching those dubs, and they are not the best dubs. They're a bunch of fun. Some of them have put a lot of work into making it their own. Godzilla King of the Monsters, that first dub that has a bunch of bits with Raymond Burr, who they bring back at one point. So they did work, but it was often still, when they were putting that heart into it, it was moving it away from that original message. And then I think it's additionally because there's just so many of them. A lot of people have kind of thought of it as an action franchise and not realizing kind of how hard-hitting that first film is. So I fell in love with Godzilla as a kid, and then just never stopped. I now have they haven't released the anime trilogy on home video, because that's a Netflix co-production. But other than that, I own every Godzilla film on Blu-ray.
Wow,
fantastic! Which is there's a lot of them.
There's a lot of those.
It's a whole chunk of my shelf. So I've been a fan of this one most of my life, and have just fallen more in love with it as I've gotten older, and I have seen more of the original films and learned more about the production and the backstory behind it.
Very cool. I love that.
Yeah,
Max,
super stoked.
What's your history with Godzilla?
I think I was culturally aware of Godzilla from a young age. I remember being a kid and catching Godzilla's destruction of Tokyo in this film. My dad, I think, was watching this at some point when I was a kid, and I just caught like that kind of attack, that kind of major attack in this movie. And I thought that was super cool, but I didn't really know what I was looking at. Like, he was like, this is Godzilla, and I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But I was kind of coming of an age where America wasn't doing Godzilla yet until I was like a teenager for me. That's like my age range is like 98 happened with Matthew Broderick before I was born. And then I grew up at a time when like, you know, the Japanese films weren't really coming over in a big way over here necessarily unless you were like looking for it. And America wasn't really doing any until 2014 when Gareth Edwards did his version. And I think that's when I really kind of became more aware of Godzilla as a thing. And so I remember, you know, I was 14, Gen Z kid on the internet, so I just did what I did with every franchise, which is learn everything I can about every entry at like the surface level, I should say. I just like read like, okay, this is the basic, you know, layout of the originals. This is this. And I just did that for a day. And then I was like, great, I now understand the cultural relevance of this, which is not true. But I was 14, so whatever. So I'm unfortunately pretty lacking on having seen Godzilla films. And I hadn't actually seen this all the way through before. So, yeah, so I watched it today, the day that we're recording this. I watched it all the way through for the first time. Before this, you know, I saw 2014 Gareth Edwards American movie. I saw, and then last year I caught up with Shin Godzilla and Godzilla -1. So those are kind of the major beats of my history with Godzilla. And I watched Godzilla X Kong, or versus Kong, I should say, which was the first time I ever had a Baja Blast, so I had a great time either way. The movie wasn't
that is the Baja Blast of movies. So
honestly, good pairing. And I have been chasing that high since 2021. What year was that? Anyway, that's kind of my rough history with the Godzilla franchise. Parker, what about you?
Similar in some regards for sure. Like the concept of Godzilla has been pretty omnipresent since I can remember. I don't remember a time learning what Godzilla was. I just knew that Godzilla existed. I knew that it was, you know, this Japanese export, essentially. I might, honestly, my first introduction to Godzilla might have been some sort of, like, Rampage-style video game. It might have been, like, some monster fighter a friend of mine had is like, Godzilla versus, and it feels, I couldn't pinpoint that for you, but that feels right to me, of like, I got introduced to Godzilla outside of the film medium for sure, but like knew very much what Godzilla was, and like the terminology of like, if you describe something big, you know, it's Godzilla, you know, but could not tell you where that started for me. It was just had been around since as long as I can remember. I think, if memory serves, I probably tackled it sometime in the aforementioned teenage years with the computer in the bedroom, you know? Yeah. I think it was sometime in that 13 to 14-year-old range of watching the great movies. And I remember really enjoying it. Similar, it was interesting because I was aware of like the Gareth Edwards Godzilla movies in like 2014, but I just didn't bother with them. Like I think I'd done my like franchise deep dive before that and knew a lot of stuff and watched various video essays about the history of the franchise and things, but I think I watched, I'm pretty sure I have seen like the 70s like Godzilla Kong movie. I've seen that one, and I've obviously seen this, and I've seen -1. I haven't seen Shin Godzilla. I'd like to. It's on my list. But I've not delved any deeper into the rest of the franchise, despite, like, again, knowing a decent amount about the rest of them. But I do remember watching this for the first time and really enjoying it quite a bit and being very impressed by, like, I think what I had known about Godzilla did not lead me to believe that this movie would be as somber as it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, especially now, you know, American Godzilla and Japanese Godzilla are two very different entities. And it's interesting because all I knew was, you know, I was born just before the Matthew Broderick, Roland Emmerich one. Have never seen it, but like I'm sure if you asked my parents, they were familiar with that movie. And that was kind of the version of Godzilla I was familiar with growing up. So when I watched this for the first time, I was like, oh man, this is sad. This is really just kind of dour.
Do you know
it really is a horror film?
Yeah, very
like
much
we
so.
don't and
Yeah.
the franchise has become like an action franchise. And they've started with the last couple of films. They have really started going back to those roots with Shin Godzilla, with Godzilla -1, talking about kind of, more of where the series came from.
Yeah.
But this first film, like, it is a horror film.
Mm-hmm.
And
Very
there's
much so.
there's a few scenes. Anytime anyone will question me on that, there's a few scenes I'll pull out. But it gets dark.
Yeah.
It gets so dark.
I had this question in my mind last year when I saw -1 of like, one, it's a bummer to me that the United States didn't really have like, well, initially I was like, oh, did we ever do like, what is our Godzilla? What is our monster movie reckoning with a major disaster? And I went, oh, it's Cloverfield. That's easily put together. Yeah. Despite Spielberg's best efforts. And then I would say, but now as I think about it, I go, well, what is an American film franchise that is analogous to Godzilla? And is it Rambo?
You could make the argument. You could make the argument.
Might be.
I don't think like First Blood is, like, I don't think it has as much influence on our culture as Godzilla did, and I think we'll dive into Godzilla's impact here.
No, but like I see what you're saying
like,
about like the Flanderization of the character versus like its stand-in for a very particular wartime experience. Yeah,
and like if like the cultural understanding of Rambo, if you go back to the first movie, you'd be like, oh,
yeah,
and I think it's deeply American in that people have no comprehension that like this is not the direction that Rambo should have gone.
Right.
Like nobody understands that, like, wait a second, this was an anti-war film and now he's just like mowing down peasants.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I think there is, and this is another one, like, I don't think America has the self-awareness to pick up on this, but I do think there is an argument to be made that, like, King Kong is kind of like the dangers of, empiricism, but from the other side.
Oh, sure.
This is, colonialism is what fights back when you go enslaving enough small countries.
Yeah.
So I think there's an argument to be had there.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's really felt past the first film. Minus Kong Skull Island, which was part of the Monsterverse with Godzilla. I think that touched on that a bit more directly, but
yeah,
I don't think we have the self-awareness to keep that going across a franchise.
No.
Is the
tough thing.
problem.
So I guess my question is, obviously there are themes that are in this first Godzilla film, and I'm actually pretty unfamiliar. Do those carry over into the more action-y entries where it's like Godzilla versus blank?
It varying levels.
Okay.
You do at one point, there's like aliens show up and they are pitching the monsters against each other, and there's a whole subtext there that varies from film to film. The direct sequel to this, Godzilla Raids Again, does have some more of those tones, but it varies. Some of them completely throw that out the window. And some of them get kind of into, I think, the theme of this movie, whereas, like, is the thing that is best for your country worse for humanity? And there's some films that kind of get into that with Godzilla, where Godzilla, sort of the success of Godzilla worldwide, kind of then becomes this, giant monster that destroys things. Kind of came to be seen as a symbol of like Japanese might. Like, it kind of became this positive symbol for Japan. And I think there are a few films that try and reckon with that, but it's not consistent.
Okay.
I think it's tried to be more the last... I think it's tried to be more the last two films. I think Shin Godzilla is fascinating because the whole thesis of that film is like, you know, if we were to be attacked by a giant monster, the thing that would decide our fate is not military strength, but like the strength of our bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Like there's films that have started to really reckon with that, but it was pretty inconsistent across the film. Sometimes it was there. Some of the films have more explicit themes. Mothra is very much environmentalist, and so anytime Mothra is there, that typically is a factor. But it just varies. It's not very consistent, unfortunately.
Yeah,
or unfortunately, I don't know. Depends on what you're in the mood for.
Yeah, I that was something I remember being confused about, like as I was doing research on the franchise and its kind of tendrils as time went on, is that it's like wild that Tokyo made the embodiment of the atom bomb mayor for a day and like the international, you know, spokesperson for the country. And it's like, where did this switch happen? Where did it stop being the trauma and became, like you said, almost a symbol of like Japanese might and power, and like he is the defender of Japan? It's just interesting to, you know, study where that handoff happens.
I think a factor was I mean, post-war Japan had a very difficult time, in part because their reputation was hit so hard, and it is I think having a place in pop culture was a positive thing for the nation on the global scale, and Godzilla did that. This wasn't huge. I mean, this wasn't the biggest Japanese film of even the year that it came out, but it did so well abroad. It was such a big hit in the rest of the world, and that I think helped Japan reintegrate into the world in a way that it hadn't really been allowed to in that immediate aftermath of World War II.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
I think that's a really good point. Do we want to talk a little bit about how this movie came to exist? Okay.
I've got a bit of research, and obviously I'm sure Brogan, you are kind of a wealth of knowledge in this area. So if anything that we're tossing out is off board, let us know, and you lead us along if you've got stuff.
I've got stuff, but I'm excited to hear your stuff. Also, you can just say geek. You don't have to say wealth of knowledge.
Yeah. No, wealth of knowledge, 100% wealth of knowledge. So from what I was finding, which I thought, like, I'm always intrigued by like the development of these things. And so originally there was a completely different film that was going to be a co-production of Japan and Indonesia. And the producer eventually of Godzilla, who is was attached to this, Tomoyuki Tanaka, they were going to do this film, and it ended up kind of falling apart because of very strong anti-Japanese sentiment in Indonesia at the time. He flew to Jakarta to try and renegotiate with the government. It was unsuccessful. On the flight back, he's like, I want to do something else. And he starts brainstorming the idea of a giant monster movie, inspired both by the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms as well as the Lucky Dragon fishing boat incident, which is like directly referenced at the beginning of the film. And so he starts working on this thing. He writes an outline with the working title, The Giant Monster from 20,000 Miles Beneath the Sea. A bit lengthy, a bit long in the tooth, perhaps. Comes back
Kong.
Versus Kong. To Electric Boogaloo. It's all there. Comes back, pitches the project. He gets approved for production. originally went through a lot of different iterations. The monster was at one point like a giant octopus. It was not initially like, Godzilla kind of giant lizard out the gate, but kind of went back and forth. A lot of people started tossing in ideas. Toho was not super keen on having where's the director's name?
Ishirō Honda.
Yes, Ishirō Honda. Thank you. Yes, they weren't super keen about having Ishirō Honda as the film's director, but he had wartime experience, which made him an ideal candidate for like the anti-nuclear themes, which were very much like baked in from the beginning. Again, with the the Lucky Dragon fishing incident being a huge part of this, they're like, yeah, okay, this is something that we need to talk about. Which essentially, for those not in the know, was that. And I don't know all of the nitty-gritty details about how all of this happened. So I'm sure that, there are experts who understand this a lot better than I do. But from what I was able to gather, essentially what happened was that there was this fishing boat that went through a bunch of nuclear fallout from the test set Bikini Atoll on March 1st, 1954. The crew were exposed to radiation and suffered and died, and it was awful. It was this terrible, terrible thing that happened to all of them, and made international news that this crew of 25 people or something like that had basically been wiped out in a series of months.
Which was a big deal because the United States had been keeping secret that they were doing this testing, so there was no reason for the crew of this little fishing boat to know that they shouldn't have been out there until they saw the explosion. I mean, which they said looked like a second sun. And at that point, they realized what's going on because, they had already been through this.
Right.
And they hurry back to Japan. But then there was, this uproar because then it's like, oh, can we eat the fish? Like the fish that we're getting, which is a huge part of the diet there in Japan. There was, worries about the fish being contaminated. And there was, kind of this upset on the global scale that America was doing this testing in secret without telling anyone after it had been like, hey, we shouldn't, because the initial idea with the bomb is like, okay, we did the bomb. We don't have to keep improving the bomb. We don't need to do the bomb anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was a big deal.
Yeah. And I do find it interesting that the United States is not mentioned in Godzilla at all. Like when they talk about nuclear testing and they're talking about these things, they aren't like pointing a finger, almost because they don't have to, because at the time my understanding is like we were the only nation doing this. But I do find it really interesting that it doesn't come up of like who or where or why. It's just kind of like, and if this doesn't stop, there will be more of this. And I'm actually kind of curious because I haven't seen Godzilla King of the Monsters, which is the 56 re-edit and reshoot basically, where they just added a bunch of American. Doesn't an American news reporter go and he witnesses the events?
Yes.
Okay, Brogan, I'm assuming you've seen that.
Yeah,
there?
So I mean, that was one of the first ones I saw. It's super interesting because despite this film not calling out America specifically in any way, and I think the entire character of Dr. Serizawa exists to kind of almost as an olive branch. Of trying to be like, trying to understand that like that had to have been a very difficult thing, even if, obviously the Serizawa takes a more heroic route. But kind of that conflict of, is what is best for my country worse for humanity? And how do you rational that? I don't think it's an anti-American film. I think it actually goes out of its way to extend an olive branch to America. But despite that, Godzilla King of the Monsters pulls out a bunch of things specifically because it did not want to because American distributors like we can't we can't do this. It's too harsh in America. We can't make anything that we did look bad.
Right.
Yeah.
It is interesting that you bring, and we'll get into that character proper during the summary, but like, I do find it interesting that they were already in this, the creators and writers of this are already in the mindset of like, hey, you messed up, you made something really, really terrible. And we recognize that like, yeah, this issue is present almost immediately. And it is kind of a bummer that the character in this who creates, an equivalent weapon, the oxygen destroyer, is kind of like, yeah, this can only be used this one time, and I will go to great lengths to ensure that.
Yeah. And I will die to make sure that happens.
And at some level, that feels like an olive branch, and also kind of like, it could be a condemnation of like and you're
did
still...
Oppenheimer watch this movie? Like, I need to know. I really need to know if he ever saw Godzilla.
I have looked into it, and if he did, he didn't like talk about it publicly.
Okay.
Sure.
I desperately would have loved to have known his thoughts.
It's like wanting to know if Hearst saw Kane, but it's a similar level of like, did you see it? Did you watch it?
Yeah.
And it's like different.
Yeah, how did you feel during those scenes? Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
But yeah, so as they're developing it, it actually opened. It was going to directly reference this incident. It was going to have footage from it in the opener. There was an extended opening with like a voiceover monologuing, talking about the 1952 and 1954 hydrogen bomb tests with the real footage. And that ended up getting cut when it came down to actually writing the screenplay and getting everything honed in, as it were. But one of the pieces that I found in the research that I thought was very interesting was to drum up, as part of the marketing, they did a radio play of the film. It's 11 episodes long. It's based on the screenplay. It was aired on Saturdays, called Monster Godzilla, from July 17th to November 25th of 1954. They really wanted to make sure that people were building anticipation for this. They banned reporters from the sets, kept the special effects hidden, wanted to really kind of create some mystery around this entire project to get people intrigued about it, which I just thought was just the radio play specifically. I was like, that's really cool.
Yeah. No, that's very interesting. That feels, I don't know, that's kind of the... Oh, go ahead.
Oh no! So that was something that was far more common back in the day, of doing radio shows. That used to be a pretty common promotional tool, and you'd see a lot of them. You even have, like they bring in the original cast. The cast of the film would come in and they would do a radio show, and sometimes they would be longer ones with multiple episodes. And sometimes it would be like an abbreviated, like a 30-minute version or a 1-hour version of the film. But that was a pretty common promotional tool. And unfortunately, I don't know about the Godzilla one, but a lot of them don't survive. Some of them do survive and are a bunch of fun to listen to. The original King Kong radio show is also pretty fun. Neat.
Very nice.
Okay, that's very fun.
But yeah, that's some of the generalized kind of research up front that I was able to find. There was a couple other pieces that I thought were interesting. That when they were working on the special effects, they went to go to scout locations that they wanted Godzilla to destroy. And they got detained and almost arrested by a security guard who heard them talking about blowing all of this up and like how they would destroy it, and he thought they were terrorists. And then the police released them when they showed them their Toho business cards. They're like, no, we promise, we're not terrorists. Like we're just doing a monster movie.
Oh, that's funny.
No, it's funny. They did go through a lot of how they came to the design was just budget limitations.
Yeah.
Because like you mentioned the octopus, they wanted it to be an octopus, and they just didn't have the the special effects budget. Originally, it was going to be a Ray Harryhausen type, stop motion special effects, and they just didn't have the money for it. So they eventually landed on kind of this suitmation design.
Yeah,
they were throwing stuff against the wall at one point. There was a Godzilla design that had a head shaped like a mushroom cloud, because they're like, let's get really on the nose.
Let's get on the nose. Subtleties for cowards.
And there was a version where they were going to do kind of a gorilla whale kind of thing, because that's what Gogeta is a kind of a compound of, right? Is the word for gorilla and the word for whale, I believe.
Yep.
Yeah, it's very interesting. That was another thing that I was reading up on, was just the suitmation of it all. They had two performers doing Godzilla in the suit, Haru Nakajima and Katsumi Tezuka, and this was pretty brutal for them to do. It was a lot of just, it got so hot in there. Nakajima lost 20 pounds during the production of the film. He could only be in the full body for 3 minutes before passing out in there, because it was just so heavy and hot under the lights. So you see a lot of production photos, they cut it in half. So anything that wasn't full body would just be the feet, and it was basically these giant suspenders, and that was a lot easier for them to work around with. And then for the close-ups of the face, they actually had an articulating puppet that they could open the mouth and it would spray out the steam for the atomic breath. But yeah, it was just, it was very physically taxing to be inside that suit, to the point that Tezuka filmed scenes, but he was the older out of the two, and it was a lot harder for him to move around, and most of his stuff was just completely unusable. They just didn't even put it in the film, because it was a noticeable difference.
Yeah, it was, it's brutal, because they originally, the suit they built was just too much, which is they cut it in half, and they're like, we don't want to waste it to get a new suit. They use a new suit that they built for some shots. But yeah, the close-ups, the shots where Godzilla's coming out of the water, that's the top half of the suit in some of the shots, where you see Godzilla swimming. It's that's suitmation is, we kind of look at it as cheesy now, but it's very, I think, physically taxing. It's totally not something I would like to do.
No, I was trying to find the figures. I couldn't find one for the second version of the suit, which they used most of. But the first version of the suit, which is partially used in the film, weighed 220 pounds.
Wow.
It's just quite literally the equivalent of like a naval diving suit that these guys would get in and go stomp around in for a while. It's just crazy.
Which is, yeah, and it's hard to control, and it's hard to see. I watched an interview with one of the special effects, with a member of the special effects team, and this guy's talking about how you try and direct, and he's like, okay, I need you're going to take like this many steps, because he couldn't see. But they couldn't have them go too far, because they would break sets that they're not ready to break yet. So they were like, okay, you're going to go to this many steps, and if you feel this, you've gone too far and you need to stop. And then it's tricky. At one point they they broke through the floor of like the miniature set that they built, which was awkward, because it was first a member of the crew that accidentally stepped through the set, and they have to rebuild part of it, and then they fix that and they start rolling, and then Godzilla just through the floor, which is how this would actually go in real life,
right?
If we were to actually have a kaiju, there would be lots of problems, but it took a lot from the crew as well just to make this work.
Yeah, it's just like a really kind of taxing production all around.
Very much so.
And it looks great.
Yeah,
I just want to speak to that. I think, when Godzilla comes out of the water, even just like the first moment that we see its head when it kind of comes over the mountain.
Effective.
it's very effective. I think it looks really great.
I also want to shout out the work of the matte paintings in the film. Specifically, I think my favorite shot in the movie is the overhead shot from up at the hill, looking at his footprints and his tail mark going into the, like, I love that shot. And that's a matte painting. Like, this is beautiful painting of just that beach with the footprints and the tail drag. I like that a lot.
It really is such a beautiful film. And it's a tricky thing because this is another thing that I think gets lost in a lot of the sequels. And so people kind of have this perception of it being a goofy thing and of the special effects being cheesy. And I think this really is a beautiful film. And I think the special effects really do, for the most part, hold up. There's a few that are, kind of wonky, but the special effects hold up. The sets, the matte paintings, they hold up. It's a really beautiful film.
Yeah. I love when the radio towers melt. I think that's so effective, and it didn't immediately occur to me. I had to look it up. It's it's wax, but just watching that happen, I was just that just looks incredible. That's a really impressive thing. And I imagine it is just compositing, right? It's just editing together people running away on the bottom and Godzilla over them. That always looked pretty much perfect to me. I had a hard time not just seeing it as it was intended to be seen, of just there's this massive creature stepping around and people are running away at the bottom, and it just always looked great to me.
Yeah. There's a lot of composites in the film of, people running away from Godzilla, but also sometimes they wanted to have more people running than they could fit on the set, and they would use a composite there. And sometimes they would, want to have people alongside a bigger set, and they would composite the people on the set with the model. There's a lot of those practical kind of camera tricks in this film.
Yeah it's great.
Just to make sure we don't miss anything, maybe we should kind of look into a summary really quick here and just
sounds lovely.
Move through it. I just want to give a quick shout out. Parker, you were talking about how they initially had this idea of opening with real footage of the tests and such. I do think that the opening titles of this are just very effective. It's pretty wild to me that I don't think the Godzilla roar has ever sounded more effective to me than it does just right from the top of this film. I think obviously with modern technology we're doing more to make you be that's coming out of the monster, but really I think it's at its scariest here. Which is it's a glove on a base, right? That's what the Godzilla roar is.
It's a leather glove on a a contrabass that had been the strings had been detuned to be extra low, and it was a whole thing. It was actually Akira Ikefube, who is the composer of the film, who does the score.
Which shout out to the theme. Oh my god, I love the theme.
Yeah.
It's fun. I sing it to myself when I'm stepping on things. It's a really just truly iconic score. Yeah. But yeah, he was involved in figuring out what sound they were going to do. And so he's like, yeah, let's do this.
Yeah. I mean,
it's one of my favorite things about just icons of film history is just, I can imagine them sitting down with a microphone and they've got this contrabass and they're just running their hand over it, 3, 5, however many times they're doing this over and over and over again. And then just one of them catches, and one of them is the sound that's in the movie. And they're just yeah, that was it.
Yeah, I think good sound design is, the most overlooked. Most of the film production process is overlooked. People don't like to think about how the sausage is made, but I think sound design especially is just awe-inspiring.
Yeah. And easily, it's got to be in the top 5 cinema sound effects, most iconic,
I would
most
say
recognizable.
So, right? It just,
right?
It keeps even I can't think of really any other sound effect. Because even the Star Wars lightsaber sound has been like, they make new ones for the new stuff. They're basing it off of that, but like, to my knowledge, they just clean up this roar and use it over and over and over again. Is that correct, Brogan?
I know that they have done different versions at different times. So I don't know. I don't know what percentage of roars are the original roar. I know that the MonsterVerse Godzilla is a different roar, because they have like teased that they did something similar to get the sound, but won't ever actually say what it actually is that they use.
I remember reading some article during the run of -1 where they were talking about using the original roar and like how that was important to them.
Yeah. There's a couple different roars. I know Godzilla nerds that are better nerds than me that can like listen to the Godzilla sound and tell you which one of the movies it's from. But so I know they've changed it around somewhat, but they do use this roar quite a bit.
Totally. So yeah, I would agree, Max. I think this is like a top 5 kind of iconic sound effect in cinema for sure.
Yeah.
Where would you put this against the Wilhelm scream, Max?
This goes above it, I think. I would say so, because Wilhelm scream is like, that was created with an intention and then has become ironic in its usage, and that doesn't mean that it's less iconic, but it does mean that it makes me want to put Godzilla higher. In that I'm like, Godzilla is being used in the way that was intended, whereas Wilhelm is kind of like, wouldn't it be funny if we just kept
Wouldn't it be
this?
funny to throw him in here?
Fair. A good
Have
point.
they ever met? Surely not.
I'm sure that there has been a Wilhelm scream in a Godzilla movie. I feel like that I would be shocked if that were not the case. I know there's been Wilhelm screams in multiple King Kong movies.
Okay.
And King Kong and Godzilla have met. So at the very least, they're like 2 degrees.
It's like it's like their bacon number at this point, right? Like how degrees removed from Godzilla or Wilhelm are you? That's really good.
Yeah.
So you were talking about the opening titles.
Yes, I was. The most important part of the summary.
Hey, you got the first moment this time, though.
We got there.
It.
So a Japanese freighter is destroyed near Odo Island, and then another ship goes out to investigate, and it also vanishes. And then at around the same time, a fishing boat from Odo is also destroyed, with only one survivor who and we see, people reacting to this. Unfortunately, I'm not as well versed. I literally watched this movie a number of hours ago, so I don't know why I'm necessarily the one recounting this. But
so you should remember it fresh. Then,
oh, you're
right.
right.
That's you got no excuses, is what I.
Were you paying attention, Max?
Yeah. Did you watch the movie?
Yeah, it's the
Sounds
one
like
with
this
the
guy
monkey.
didn't watch the movie.
It's the one with the monkey. I've seen it.
I've seen it.
And he's singing pop songs.
Yeah.
That's what we were watching, right? Okay. Well, I'm just not gonna have any I don't remember the exact names of the people in the love triangle.
Yeah, you're doing great. You're doing good.
Thanks, Parker. A fishing boat is destroyed. We do go to Odo Island, and we see kind of the fishing village community kind of reacting to this, and they know that who Godzilla is, which I find very interesting, because every time, when I went into -1, I had a similar expectation of but he's new on the scene, and he's not new on the scene. People are aware of him. They've sacrificed to him before.
Yeah, he used to be a big deal.
Right.
He's a has-been.
Godzilla's I guess you could say he's washed up.
Yeah, he's washed.
Washed up.
Oh.
Oh no.
Washed up like the remains of that fishing boat.
You'll never work again in this town, Godzilla. You've wrecked it.
No young girls on rafts for you.
No.
Oh.
That's Godzilla.
Yeah.
No. Anyway. I don't know. Is that? Am I?
That's.
I guess
I mean, that's the opening.
y'all are,
Y'all
are familiar with this.
Yeah,
y'all are
that's
familiar
the
with this.
opening.
But I'm just shocked that he existed. Is the implication that he's been irradiated for a long time, or that he existed as? Because he's from the Jurassic period, and he's recently been irradiated, right?
So, I mean, there's kind of this question, which they go into it a bit more in King Kong versus Godzilla, which came a few years later, but there is kind of this question of like how much of what they're saying is actually Godzilla and how much of it is folklore.
Right.
And there is clearly a relationship here, but also how much of that is like, you know, the old people talking, trying to scare kids, and how much of it is actually this little fishing village's relationship with Godzilla. So I think there's some ambiguity there,
right,
as to just how established that relationship is. Because at the very least, I think if Godzilla was always, you know, popping up on Odo Island, I think somebody would have noticed by now.
Sure.
Right.
I think somebody else would have been like, wait a second.
Hold
You guys
on.
have a what?
Yeah. You've just been seeing this guy for how long?
Do you not have one of these?
They're a dime a dozen around here.
We thought everyone had one.
We named ours. We thought it was like a fun... Yeah. All right. Well, all right.
Do you not have pets? I thought you had pets. What pets do you have?
Our pet's been acting real weird since...
This is a little weird.
Good.
Well, one of the fishermen like sees a cat for the first time and like freaks out.
Right. That's shocking to him, but Godzilla is normal to him because he's from Odo Island. Right.
Yeah, of course.
Now that's a good... Somebody write that down.
Write that down.
Yeah, so a villager tells one of the reporters that something in the sea is ruining the fishing. And they find a trilobite, and I loved when they found the trilobite.
There's no fish.
That's maybe later.
It's a little bit
that
later,
evening,
but yeah.
a storm strikes the island, destroying the reporters. This sequence is awesome.
It's really good.
The miniatures shaking, the set, kind of the combination of miniatures and the set is really great. I really enjoy it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do like that segment a lot, and just kind of like the flashes, the hints you get of the size of like the feet coming down and things, but you know, we're getting him in pieces. We're not seeing the whole thing yet.
Right. Yeah.
And also, I mean, one of the first people you see die is the one fisherman that survived. Like the one fisherman who survived, you know, that fishing boat's running with Godzilla. He's one of the first to go. This film really wants you to like know everyone who dies. It spends a lot of time kind of introducing brief characters so that it hurts more when they're killed in the next scene.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I think that's a very good point. Like they're doing that very intentionally. Mm-hmm. Always taking the time to make sure that we have a little bit of introduction to the person before. Yeah, which is nice and effective, like you said, Parker. So a storm kind of takes out the helicopter, and Godzilla briefly seen destroys 17 homes and kills 9 people and 20 of the villagers. I didn't realize the summary would list the exact numbers.
Yeah, it's got the exact stats.
But I'm glad we're keeping the kill count up to date here. So the Odo residents travel to Tokyo to demand disaster relief. And the villagers and reporters' evidence describes damage consistent with something large crushing the village. I do like when they're kind of explaining what's happened, and they're like, well, you know, upon investigation, these houses were crushed by a force coming down. Definitely not a storm. And I just really liked how they were like, I don't know, I really like the description of like a force coming down crushed it, where I'm like, you can't really argue with that.
Can't fake that.
Yeah. The government sends a paleontologist to lead an investigation on the island. There's the giant footprints and a trilobite. That's where the trilobite shows up.
Yes.
Village alarm bell is rung, and the villagers, they all kind of rush to see the monster. and then Godzilla's head comes over the mountain.
I really like that. It's a good shot. I really do like that.
It was very surprising. I was like, "Whoa, there he is." Any kind of overarching thoughts over this sequence that I've brushed past very quickly?
It really, I think this movie does a very good job at not making you wait forever to see Godzilla, but revealing Godzilla in pieces. You don't see all of Godzilla at once. You see the impact of Godzilla. You see, you see a foot and you see a head. You don't see like the full might of Godzilla right away, which I think it's great. I think it makes Godzilla scarier. I think it makes you spend more time caring about the people. And that wasn't originally. Originally, they were just going to reveal Godzilla at the beginning. And Honda was like, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to hold off. So I think that was really effective.
Yeah, very effective like monster making.
That's often the case with these early monster movies, that everyone's kind of like, it's amazing how they decided to not show it immediately, and it's always like, well, it was kind of a last minute decision, or it's like, the thing broke, so, and you're just like, oh, okay. Yeah, that's always interesting. I mean, the kind of rush back down the hill. I like how they are rushing around to look at it, and they run away when they see it, but they're always like, we gotta, see where it's going. And as part of the aforementioned matte painting of the tail and the feet going into the ocean, I think I audibly was like, oh.
Yeah.
It's just like,
nice.
yeah.
It's just like, it's really good. It's really good. Yeah, and I just like... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, and the paleontologist here, that's Takashi Shimura, who was a fixture of Akira Kurosawa's films. This same year was in Seven Samurai.
Right, because
he was in, like, he had already done Drunken Angel and Rashomon and Ikiru. He was a super beloved, critically adored actor in Japan, that they got to do this monster movie, and I think it's great. I think he kills it here, but he is like a huge get for the film. Huge. Wow.
Oh, thank you so much for mentioning that, because I just wouldn't have even really thought about that.
I recognized him, but I'd forgotten that because I knew him from Ikiru, but I hadn't placed that he had been in so many of the others as well.
That's interesting, though, also, because I think Seven Samurai, did that go to, like, the Academy Awards or something?
I don't know.
It won some sort of award over this. Like, these two went up against each other at a later thing, and I think Seven Samurai, like, I don't know, they came out in the same year. And I think that they did go up for something. I can't remember what it would have been. But
so, Seven Samurai, it did go to the Academy Awards, but not for, like, multiple years later. So I don't...
I see.
Oh, interesting.
There was this thing where it didn't get a stateside release right away. And so it was like 2 or 3 years later when it went to the Oscars.
Oh, fascinating.
And I don't know. I don't think they were doing best foreign language film yet, but I know it got like costume design and I think something else nomination. I don't remember if it won. I don't think it did.
Very interesting.
Interesting. Well, that's very interesting. No, yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Brogan, because I hadn't even considered that really. But so he returns. The character's name here is Kyohei Yamane, I'm going to guess. He returns to Tokyo and presents his findings, estimating Godzilla's height, and that he has evolved from an ancient sea creature. He concludes that Godzilla has been disturbed by underwater hydrogen bomb testing. And debate ensues about notifying the public about the danger of the monster. My dad, who speaks a little bit of Japanese, and he lived in Japan for 2 years. He caught that, like, the way that one of the guys tells, like, there's like civilians in the room, or there's like a group of people, like the leader of them is a woman in the room when they're debating about telling the public, and she's like, that's exactly what the public deserves to know. and the man tells her to be quiet in like the rudest way you could say it in like Japanese language. And I just thought, I don't know, that's kind of interesting. But I also really appreciate how he presents the evidence, where he's like, and there are 3 reasons that we know. And he's kind of like, 1, like this trilobite, 2, this. And then someone's like, but how do you know it's, how do you know it has anything to do with the bomb? And then he's like, well, it's irradiated. Like, I don't know. I just think it's
radioactive.
I like that it feels like he was kind of like waiting for someone to ask so he could be like, yeah, here's why.
Actually, let me tell you.
Glad you brought that up, idiot.
Yeah, I was getting to that, but now that you mention it, you look like a real fool now. But
I also do love the fact, like, just, again, it's something that I forget about with this movie compared to so much of the rest of the Godzilla oeuvre, that, like, they are very specific about him being like, yeah, this is a, like, Jurassic era dinosaur that we woke up,
Yeah.
Which is very interesting.
It says here as well, meanwhile, 17 ships are lost at sea.
Wow.
I had not caught 17.
Yeah, they're very specific in this summary about the numbers of everything.
Listen, the people that love Godzilla are gigantic nerds.
Yeah, they crunch those numbers.
We want to know what he's up
data
to.
And spreadsheets.
And it was a force going downwards that crunched the numbers.
Right.
Just so
yes. Not a typhoon. Couldn't be.
Not a typhoon. Couldn't be. So 10 frigates are dispatched to attempt to kill the monster using depth charges. So the mission disappoints Yamane, who wants Godzilla to be studied. And when Godzilla survives the attack, officials appeal to him for ideas to kill the monster, but he tells them that Godzilla is unkillable, which I would agree with.
I like the narrative thread. I like this idea of him being like a conscientious objector to this and like wanting to study it. It does make me laugh every time the first time they introduce it, because he just gets up from the table and goes and leaves, and he sits in the room by himself. And everybody's like, he's a zoologist. He's upset about this.
But
it's just really funny.
Yeah, and this really gets to, because there's this kind of idea, which I think is a thing that Japan was reckoning with at this time, like, because the film makes a point to show us the cost of Godzilla, like the lives being lost. It makes a direct point of showing the audience that. And there are films that kind of do the whole like, oh, it's not ethical to kill this creature, that is kind of just glossing over, the body count. And so I think at this point it's a little, because we've kind of just seen the cost and we haven't really gotten to see much of Godzilla. I think at this point it's a little weird. Like, it feels out of left field that he's coming like this. Like, the normal movie would not do this. But I think it's good, and I think it builds upon that in a really interesting way as time goes on.
Yeah, I think it takes the movie in an interesting direction. Of, like, because it's so easy to, as you're saying, like, take into account the cost, the devastation of Godzilla. But this notion of, like, we talk about this movie being kind of dour. I mean, it's dour in its portrayal of Godzilla altogether. Like, it's not just, Godzilla is a force that is killing people. It's Godzilla is also a creature that has been awakened by human activity, by the same thing that is, kind of has kind of traumatized and impacted the nation of Japan, right? Like, the same force has kind of created Godzilla that is shaping Japan through, the bombings and the kind of the radioactivity that's still there. And I do think that kind of is what leaves the door open for, as we were talking about earlier, for Godzilla to become kind of a symbol of Japan's strength, is that Godzilla has I don't know if I like saying this, but I think it makes sense, of like Godzilla has gone through the nuclear era and come out the other side, in a sense. I don't know. I think there's a connection there that I think a lesser movie wouldn't make. and a lesser movie wouldn't ask you to care for this creature.
Right. I'm trying to see. There's a quote about that in the movie that stood out to me that I was just thinking about Godzilla was baptized in the fire of the H-bomb and survived. What could kill it now? Is the quote from the movie. And it's like, yeah, it is. There is an interesting parallel there of, like you said, that idea of kind of going through the worst humanity has to offer and kind of coming back with a vengeance.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and kind of, I mean, there was one of the producer, Tomoyuki Tanaka, said, mankind had created the bomb. Now nature was going to take revenge. Mm-hmm. It is very much a retaliatory thing. And so the idea of, what can we do? The biggest, most powerful thing that we have is only made it stronger. So like, what could we do to defeat it? Which the movie immediately goes into exploring, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and it is curious too, because they're on paper there is a version of this that is, a Japanese made film about a monster that goes and wreaks havoc on America. That it's like, hey, we are going to do what you did to us. But there is a somberness that comes with this that specifically kind of shows up in the character of Serizawa, who is developing all of this, and he's looking at this, and he knows the cost of this. And that's something else that I love about the movie, is that I always forget, because people talk about all the time. They're like, well, Godzilla is a metaphor for the atomic bomb and what they went through, and, bombing of Hiroshima and all these things. But I always forget that those bombings exist in the world of Godzilla, and they talk about them, like on the train. They're like, I barely survived Nagasaki. Like, I can't go through this again.
Right.
Yeah. And I just find that so interesting. And again, I think that's the thing, is that a filmmaking team more removed from those events, I think, could maybe make a retaliatory, like, Monster Destroys America movie. But I think people who lived through this know that they wouldn't wish this on their worst enemies.
I was going to say, it's not about retaliation on the perpetrators. It's just, now that this force and this energy and this power exists, it will wreak havoc on us, which is to say, humanity.
Yeah.
And I do think there's something very elegant about that, like you're saying, Parker. I think that kind of lends to the kind of the somber and kind of the nuance of this film as well.
Well, and it's still, because it was still very much an impact that was being felt. Like, part of some of the scenes of people fleeing, and packing up their homes and everything, were done during actual, like, drills.
Oh, interesting.
Like actual raid drills where, they were practicing, like, okay, everyone, get out of your home, get to shelter. And they just filmed those.
Yeah.
And so part of the footage of, people fleeing was, to a degree, authentic.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
That's very interesting.
I mean, that's the thing, is this is what, this starts production within a decade of, I mean, it's not that long after at all.
Not a bit.
I'm so interested in, like, I don't know, especially like disaster movies that are like in conversation with like events like that. I think are very interesting. I mean, film in general, just any film in general, kind of responding to something like that is always very moving and interesting. So they're kind of like, there's no way we could really, destroy him because he survived H-bomb testing. But let's see. Meanwhile, Yamane's daughter, Emiko, decides to break off her arranged engagement to his colleague, to her father's colleague, that is, because of her love for Hideto Ogata, a salvage ship captain. When a reporter arrives and asks to interview Serizawa, Emiko escorts the reporter to Serizawa's home. And as you mentioned, Parker, Serizawa is kind of a scientist character here who has an eye patch, which is just, I appreciate. I don't know, I just appreciate.
I also love his rolled up sleeves on his lab coat.
He looks cool.
The dude's cool.
He does, and he was originally cast as the I'm trying to remember. He was cast as another role, and I think it was a love interest. And then they were like, "Oh, this guy has a nervous energy." Yeah,
this guy broods, man. He broods.
Like he'd be great for this role. So he was originally in another part.
Interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, he's great. Yeah. Like genuinely, he does a really good job.
Great. He refuses to divulge his current work to the reporter, but he gives Emiko a demonstration of his recent project on the condition that she must keep it a secret. And it's like very like sci-fi horror movie, that
very much
sequence of like him, you know, his lab also just looks like a scientist's lab. Like, you know, Parker, we've talked about before, like, you know, Metropolis and Frankenstein and like these kind of like movies where we're like, did this kind of cement like scientist lab? And I go, this movie also definitely contributed and benefits from.
Which it really contrasts, because he really is kind of like the prototypical mad scientist, like in appearance, and he's got the weird appearance and he's got the weird lab, but it's really like in contrast to that, like he is a young guy.
Yeah.
He's not a crazy old man. He's a young guy who is still horrified by the things he did in the war.
Yeah.
Right.
And everything that he does is an attempt to seek penance, seek salvation. And that's so it's not even like the madness. It's not even a mad scientist. It's like a PTSD scientist.
A sad scientist.
It's a sad scientist. And
hey, scientists, don't get mad. Get sad.
So I think it's a really interesting contrast that they could have very easily, just kind of gone for the kind of crazier dude, and actually it's just a guy who's swallowed up in grief.
Yeah.
And has an eye patch.
Yeah. Well, and I think that like casting young, I don't know if this was their intention at the time, but it serves as an evergreen reminder of who was fighting in the war and how everyone suffers from that. It's not like it only serves to make everything in this movie feel, not like everything before this movie, I should say. Like, it makes the war feel so recent, even when you're watching it, 70 years later. And I think that's a very kind of great benefit of having him be casted younger, as we're talking about. So the demonstration horrifies her. She leaves without mentioning the engagement. Shortly after she returns home, Godzilla surfaces from Tokyo Bay and attacks Shinagawa. After attacking a passing train, Godzilla returns to the ocean. That's what this summary says. I think this attack looks phenomenal.
It's really good.
And I think that the train model looks great. The atomic breath looks great. I like that they don't even really fully highlight how his kind of back spines light up. Like they do, but I just feel like in later movies that's kind of given like this kind of accentuation shot. There's an insert to the spines lighting up, and I like that here it's just kind of part of it.
It's almost now like reverence to the lighting up of the spines. Like it's a whole ritual.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean -1 like makes it into like every single spine, like, but doesn't it like jut out further as it like
goes,
and you're kind of like, ooh, and I just like that this movie is just kind of like that's part of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
There's kind of just that's part of it level of designing the monster and kind of creating the Godzilla effect for the first time. It's just kind of like there's not really reverence for that.
Yeah, atomic breath, light up spine, like keep moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is very casual about it.
and yet at the same time, I don't know, it's just really great. The destruction looks great. Yeah, I think, I don't know, it's especially fun to see like black and white models look this good, like models look this good in black and white, especially because I'm like, that's just something that I would like to see somebody use, whether it's in like an indie film or something. I just think models are so fun, and I just think we should have more black and white models. Agreed. Generally. Yeah, I mean, we already kind of talked about the attack. Is there anything else that kind of stands out to anybody there? Attack on Shinagawa.
The Godzilla effects, most of the breath, when it's the clear breath, is they just stuck a hose through the tail of the suit up out the mouth, and then just blew smoke through the hose. But there's a couple of shots where he like needs to actually like, you know, show it burning something, where they just filled the mouth with tinfoil and stuck a propane blowtorch
Sure.
into the mouth.
Whoa. That's crazy.
Wow. I guess that is something that I do want to talk about. It's just the fire and how evocative and emotional that must have been for folks then too, because it's not just like, you know, it wasn't just the atomic bombing. It was like sustained American bombing campaigns on civilian spaces. So like seeing the city burn, that's like a really fresh kind of horrible memory that this movie is evoking. And I think I can't even imagine how, like, it's powerful to see here now, but like I can't even imagine seeing that there at the time.
I'll bet. And there's we'll get to it, but there's like a very specific moment in the attack on Tokyo that I'm sure we're all thinking about, of just like, man, they do not mess around. They just go for the throat.
Yeah. Yeah. So they consult international experts. The Japan Self-Defense Forces construct a 30 meters tall and 50,000 volts.
And the numbers are back, baby.
Normally, I try to make the summaries my own, but I'm really enjoying just reading these direct numbers. But yeah, so they construct a big fence along the coast and deploy forces to kill Godzilla. Dismayed that there is no plan to study Godzilla for its resistance to radiation, Yamane returns home where Emiko and Ogata await, hoping to get his consent for them to wed. That, again, it's
that whole subplot is so funny.
Well, it's just like, it is just kind of, again, it's not funny, but it is a little bit funny of just like, no, I'm going to ask for his consent tonight. And then he comes in just looking...
just the saddest a man has ever looked.
He's playing it so effectively that you're almost like, guys, don't. And when they don't, you're like, oh, understandable.
Well, and it's too like, the scene before this, she's like, I'm going to go and tell this guy I'm arranged to be married to that I'm not going to marry him. And then he's like, do you want to see the most
my death balls?
Thing you've ever seen?
You want to watch
Do you want to see something
melt?
that will just haunt you for the rest of your life? And then she can't, like, this couple has the most simple love story.
It should be so straightforward.
Surrounded by the most screwed up world. I cannot... Oh, no, it's so great because it is such a simple thing where it's like, I'm going to tell this guy that I'm not going to marry him. I'm going to tell my dad that I want to marry for love and not the arranged marriage that he had established. But then, like, her dad and her fiance are dealing with the, like, literal personification of nuclear holocaust. And they just want love. They just want love. And they're so in love.
And that's so real.
Yeah.
And it's very effective, but it is just like, oh, what a cruel irony.
Yeah, you can't reason with someone in 100-yard stare, you know?
Just
the most gaunt, haunted men you've ever seen in your life.
And that, unfortunately, Godzilla is trying to ruin your romance here.
Yeah.
Specifically. That's why he's on. That's why he's in Japan.
Which I guess is kind of also the plot of -1.
He's like, great. Screw this guy specifically.
He's like, this couple can't get married.
He's like, I hate this one dude so bad.
Godzilla got invited, and he was
Godzilla got the wedding invite and was like, "Oh hell no,
I'm not going.
Absolutely
I'm not going to that."
And neither is anyone else.
Oh, that's why. That's why Bridezilla as a term exists. It's from minute one, Godzilla and weddings have been tied, and we didn't even realize.
Godzilla is like Ogata's ex.
Yeah, that sounds about right. There we go. Silly.
Yeah, so they don't.
Yeah, it doesn't happen.
They don't talk to him.
But I do like Ogata coming in and being like, "Hey, actually, I disagree with you. We shouldn't save this thing. Look what it's doing." And he's like, "Get out of my house."
Yeah. Which is the opposite of what you want to hear when you were hoping to be like, "Can I marry your daughter?"
Yeah.
He's like, "Get out of my house."
And I love that she turns to him. She's like, "I'm so sorry." He's like, "No, I could have been more tactful."
Oh man, okay. It's a sad movie. It's a sad and scary movie.
Yeah, totally.
I don't want to make it seem like I'm like Godzilla. No,
Max, I'm the one that said it was funny.
Okay. All right. Well, as long as you're willing to take that fall,
I am.
as long as you're willing to get jet propulsioned into the ocean.
Yeah, anytime.
I'm good. Okay. Yeah. So they argue that the threat that Godzilla poses outweighs any potential benefits from studying him. Yamane tells him to leave. Godzilla resurfaces and breaks through the fence to Tokyo with its atomic breath, unleashing more destruction across the city. Further attempts to kill the monster with tanks and fighter jets fail, and Godzilla returns to the ocean. So this attack.
Yeah. The big one.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Speak on that.
It's just... it's cinema. It's like every kaiju giant monster movie after this is referencing this. Like there are specific shot references to this movie in like the Pacific Rim films. Like they take verbatim compositions from this scene in the movie, and it is just a very, very influential sequence in film, I think.
Yeah, no, it is and it's horrifying.
Yeah.
It is absolutely it is absolutely terrifying. And there was a lot of debate over this, but they create models of significant actual buildings in Japan. The National Diet Building, which is like their Congress, that's their Capitol building. It's there was a lot of concern over showing that building be destroyed. So it is really terrifying. And there is a scene, there is a mother holding her children, and saying, it's okay, we're going to be with daddy.
Yeah.
Which is, for something in the aftermath of World War II, that hits so hard. And that mother's line specifically, it's such a good shot that they kept that in the other the export cuts.
Oh, okay,
They kept that in.
Don't they take away the dialogue, or they change the line?
They take out the dialogue, or they put in a new line. But because that's such a horrifying scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying to watch a mother grip her children and say, it's okay, we're going to be with daddy, as the building collapses around them.
Yeah.
And yeah, the export cuts of this film, they all changed that line.
Chickened out.
They changed that line, but they couldn't get rid of that scene, that shot because it's so powerful.
That push in is incredible.
Yeah.
It is absolutely terrifying, and that's my go-to. Anytime anyone questions whether or not this is a horror film, that bit right there, it's okay, we're going to be with Daddy. That's my go-to. I show lots of people that scene and they're like, isn't Godzilla just an action movie? Because, man, what a powerful, awful, terrifying piece of film.
There's a shot in the like night attack on Odo Island that also is like so horror movie coded, of like the brother standing in the rain as everybody else comes, and it's like a close up on his face, like screaming his brother's name after the buildings collapsed on him. It's like it's a Dutch angle. It's a horror movie shot. I completely agree. Like it is harrowing.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's very effective in that way. Mm-hmm. Parker, you mentioned a specific... Was that the shot that you were talking about?
Yeah, that was 100%. Yeah, just that scene is... Yeah.
Yeah. It's really devastating.
Mm-hmm.
So Godzilla returns to the ocean. The day after, hospitals and shelters are crowded with the maimed and the dead, with some survivors suffering from radiation sickness. Again, just like... Thinking about when this comes out, like this is just kind of reckoning with imagery that is familiar to people.
Totally. It's I was thinking about it this time specifically in terms of, I would imagine this had a very similar feeling for Japanese audiences that people had to Spielberg's War of the Worlds iconography of like very pointed, specific imagery of the aftermath of 9/11. And like this hospital scene especially, I can only imagine that this is probably their news reels for years afterwards,
yeah.
you know?
And just like personal experience as well.
Yeah, just things that they had lived through and seen. And so, yeah, I would imagine this was probably very visceral at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is where they're using that actual evacuation drill footage.
Interesting.
Right.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Distraught by the devastation, Emiko tells Ogata about Serizawa's research, a weapon called the Oxygen Destroyer, which disintegrates oxygen atoms and causes organisms to asphyxiate, then dissolve, leaving nothing behind. Well, they leave behind skeletons. There's skeletons behind.
Not for long, though, and then they dissolve.
But not for
the
long,
skeletons.
and then they go away. That's a good point. You're right. Emiko and Ogata go to Serizawa to convince him to use the Oxygen Destroyer, but he initially refuses, explaining that if he uses the device, the world's superpowers will surely force him to construct more Oxygen Destroyers for use as a super weapon. And when this conversation came up, I was like, yeah, okay, great. We're full on, head on, tackling this discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I just think it's something that, perception of Godzilla and what the first Godzilla movie would be, I feel like kind of would go around this, maybe. I don't know. I feel like I've never really heard about characters having a direct discussion about atomic weapons, basically, right? And showing the creator, this
he uses the term weapon of mass destruction at one point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's like, we can't use it. And then, oh man, I love the radio. And O Piso Light. The just cutting to a choir singing this song about just not even to a specific deity necessarily, at least in the actual words to the hymn, but just asking for just help, asking for a moment of peace, is just immensely human, and I really enjoyed kind of showing this large group of people singing that song, and then coming back and Serizawa is kind of breaking down, and I don't know, he accepts their pleas, and then I love that he immediately burns the notes.
He burns his notes, and Emiko can she immediately knows he's going to die.
Yeah.
He's going to commit suicide. Which I almost does get a little bit comical over the next scene, because the only person who doesn't get it is Ogata. Everybody else figures it out, but he throws his notes in the furnace, and she immediately knows what he's going to do.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is interesting, too, because, like, when he goes down into his lab and he locks the door, I know he's going for his notes, but, like, the implication fully feels like he's going to burn his notes and then shoot himself now that somebody has found out what this is. And they, like, break down the door and they stop him, right? But, like, yeah, it is just interesting that immediately she knows what's going to happen.
Yeah. So yeah, a Navy ship takes Ogata and Serizawa to plant the device in Tokyo Bay after finding Godzilla. This is great. The underwater stuff looks fantastic.
It's really cool.
Just really neat, and I especially love how like the close-ups on Godzilla underwater are so cool. But after finding Godzilla, Serizawa activates the device and cuts off his air support, taking the secret of the oxygen destroyer to his grave. But obviously, like, Ogata returns to the ship, and they're like, pull him up, and he, kind of gives his last
And they
message.
already know.
They already know, yeah, and he cuts himself off. Godzilla is destroyed, but many mourn Serizawa's death, and then we get kind of this really great final line from Yamane of, he's like, I can't believe that he is the last of his species. If nuclear weapons testing continues, another Godzilla may rise in the future. But, he's like somewhere in the world. And I just really think that's so crucial. This notion of like, it affects all of us.
Yeah.
And I just really kind of love that. But
it's such a bummer that I think, like, in the cynical, like, franchise-driven world that we're in now, that, like, to a lot of people, this will feel like a franchise setup.
Right.
A lot of people are going to look at this and think, oh, this is setting up the, 50 Godzilla movies we've gotten since. But it really is a warning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really, not to be so 2020s minded, but it really reminds me of the final moment of Oppenheimer, of just like this, just kind of this warning and this notion of like, we're not safe. Like, we haven't and have never been safe as long as this continues. And I just really kind of wasn't fully expecting that at the end of this Godzilla movie. And like you're saying, Brogan, like the tone of it is so specific that the idea of anyone interpreting it as like, oh, well, that's just sequel bait, that's just so they can come back next year and do another one. It's like, it's a warning. This movie is not this movie is so not preoccupied with success in that way outside of success at delivering its message.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very much so.
I mean, we did get a bunch of sequels.
And we did.
But that's not what this line is.
That's not the point.
That's not the point of this.
Yeah. No, that's a good
Yeah.
point. Yeah. Well, criteria.
Any final thoughts on Godzilla overall, though, before we compare it to Citizen Kane?
I mean, I feel like I've already raved about this movie, but
All right. Well, now
damn,
it's-
what a movie.
Yeah. Really great movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think criteria is the way to move forward.
Okay. Historical or technical relevance? What do we
I
think?
think, Brogan, let's throw it to you. This is your moment.
I mean, I think that as far as there's a lot of films that oppose nuclear proliferation. I think that there are a lot of very good films that oppose nuclear proliferation. There are a lot of historically significant change policy films that oppose nuclear proliferation. I don't think any of them are as significant as this. I think that when you were talking about the dangers of these weapons and how we abuse them and how we prepare to abuse them, I think this film is always going to be one of the first things that comes to mind. And even with Godzilla changing into more of an action series for much of its history, I think that remains. And I would, as significant as I think Citizen Kane is, I think that message has been lost. I would have put these closer together prior to this last election, and now I don't. I don't feel as good about it, so I have to give this to Godzilla.
Do you think it's because Citizen Kane didn't immediately get 50 sequels in which it was like Kane versus another man, you know, and you'd be like, wow.
Look, all I'm saying is that
now he's fighting an oil baron.
I think Orson Welles would have more cultural sway had we seen him destroy a city with his giant feet. That's all I'm saying.
I mean, Orson Welles did pop into some pretty weird movies. So
that's true.
I wouldn't say that doesn't exist.
See, but that's why I phrased it specifically. I couldn't say anything about like world-ending threats because that we know that is real and has happened.
I think that Godzilla being a movie about a giant lizard has made it so that we are able to talk about it honestly.
Definitely.
And we don't talk about Citizen Kane honestly.
Yeah.
We don't talk about the history of fascism in America honestly. So I think, you know, having 50 sequels has kept it in the public eye. I don't think Citizen Kane is the sort of movie that can have 50 sequels just because it's not kind of in that world. But I think it being a movie about a giant lizard kind of lets our guard down, and we're able to talk about it honestly, and we're able to give it a bunch of sequels because you just got to put a dude in a suit,
right? And like I love this notion of talking about it honestly because at its core, where Godzilla is now, Godzilla is a Trojan horse. Godzilla is big lizard. You know, like I would argue that a lot of people aren't necessarily the most prepared to have that conversation when sitting down to watch a Godzilla movie. But I think that even though, particularly in American cinema and kind of the American adaptation of this creature, but like Godzilla is such a successful cinematic metaphor from its very first moment that even now that DNA lives on and is not easily masked because it's already put in a mask, if that makes sense. Like, it is a metaphor that is a giant lizard, and the giant lizard is so easy to remember that it's easy to remember the metaphor. Whereas Citizen Kane is a movie that is complex, and it is a movie that is doing something very well and very specifically, but that doesn't translate as easily as, I mean, think about how Citizen Kane is remembered now. It's remembered as the greatest movie of all time. Because that's easier to remember than it is the political context of Citizen Kane.
Sure,
and
exactly.
Its general meaning. Whereas Godzilla, you go, what was that about again? Giant lizard. Why was it a giant lizard? Atom bombs? And you go, oh yeah. And like, I don't know, it's kind of like, I don't know, it's like a limerick. You can remember something if it's in a limerick or an acronym better than you can if it's a full page of text that you're like, this is really well written, but I can't remember it that easily.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Exactly. That's fair. Yeah, that's an outstanding point.
Yeah. All this to say, yeah, I think, you know, something that we've talked about on this show a lot is Godzilla. What? We have not talked about Godzilla a lot on this show.
No, I don't think so.
My brain skipped. Something we've talked a lot about on this show is if something can match Citizen Kane's impact, that is worth giving it the point over Kane. And I think Godzilla creates, I mean, it had a huge impact on special effects filmmaking in Japan. It had a huge impact on culture as a whole. I think it is, like Parker said earlier, kind of it is one of the first disaster movies, you know, it is, and so specific to like kaiju cinema, and just like it is beyond its message and beyond its metaphor inherent, it is also just like Godzilla's existence has created so much off the back of it that I think it deserves the point on that point alone, as well as what you're talking about, Brogan. Where do you stand, Parker?
Same. I mean, I don't think I could put it more eloquently than both of you did. You both covered all the points that I would have wanted to talk about, and many that are more articulate than I would have put it. So I agree. I think I'd give the point to Godzilla.
Great. And Godzilla is the creature is earning these points. It's not the film. It's
of course, yes.
Yeah,
the man,
okay,
the myth, the legend. Godzilla.
Yeah.
The lizard.
The lizard.
The lizard.
Yeah.
Okay.
How well is it doing what it's trying to do?
I'll speak very briefly really quick, and then I want to hear your guys' thoughts. But I think that this movie is doing what it's trying to do very well. I think that it is devastating when it needs to be devastating, and I think that it is scary, and I think it is exciting and thought-provoking and all these things. I think it runs into a similar thing that we've talked about, Parker, where just by nature of aging, a film can... And, you know, this is why we kind of talk about why Citizen Kane is so successful, in that Citizen Kane benefits from having used a lot, or like kind of helped pioneer a lot of more modern techniques. So Citizen Kane by nature feels a little more modern, feels a little more fresh.
Sure.
As far as like looking at it, you go, wow, this looks fantastic. And I think that Godzilla looks fantastic, but it also looks fantastic as a movie from the 50s. Which is not, when I said that, I felt like I was saying something so mean. But I think that it's doing what it's trying to do very well. And even though last year when we talked about, I think we talked about Nosferatu, right? And we were like, right, but you know, Citizen Kane managed to maintain its, like watching that today feels very similar to what it must have felt like watching it at the time. Whereas now watching this compared to watching it at the time is a different experience. But I'm going to disagree with what we said for Nosferatu and say that actually isn't a knock on Godzilla. I don't know. That's kind of where my brain is. I'm just trying to get ahead of arguing with myself. But I'm curious to hear what you guys think.
I'm going to go last because I went first last time.
Okay.
So I'm interested to hear.
I think it's doing it quite well. Again, you know, digging into some of the research, it was very much from the get-go they wanted to make a movie that was anti-nuclear weaponry, and I think the movie does that flawlessly, both in its execution of the monster and also in its execution of the monster and the way they get rid of it. You know, like, I think that it is fully conscientious of the destruction these things can wreak and the cost that it has to even use it, and to use it once. And I think that the reading that I was doing made it very clear that that was their goal from the inception, and I do think that it succeeds in that. Again, even to this day, you know, we are a full 70 years on from this, and it still very much hits home with that energy that it intends. It very much, that message has not been diluted in any sort of way, and unfortunately, if anything, has become even more prevalent and something that is thought about and grappled with. So yeah, I think what it's trying to do, it is executing pretty near flawlessly, and to a way that, not that this is Kane's fault, it's the fault of everything that you guys have been talking about, of the way we teach this film, the cultural zeitgeist around the film, all these things. But it's a quality that Kane lacks, and it doesn't enjoy that same level of prevalence of its intention.
So I think the thing that I'm most impressed by is this was a film that was trying to force a conversation on the cost of nuclear weapons that managed to start that conversation not just in Japan, but even in America, despite the film being hacked to bits. If you watch Godzilla King of the Monsters, it is not nearly as good as this version. And there is a lot of censorship to the film specifically to make it so that there is that it was less critical of America, or perceived as less critical of America. And the fact that people started having that conversation because of this movie, despite that, I think is remarkable. And I don't feel like most people even understand the conversation that Citizen Kane is trying to start. Yeah. And so I have to give this one to Godzilla as well.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Oh, I'm so glad I went first there. I feel like you guys just put that so eloquently.
All right. How well are you connecting with it?
I love this movie. It's a thing that I've watched enough times that I don't even it's a thing I've watched enough times that I don't even necessarily need to it's like I can throw it on. I don't even necessarily need to be reading the subtitles.
Yeah.
I know the movie well enough. But I do also really love Citizen Kane. I think this is the closest of the three for me. But based on my most recent, I watched both of them. I watched Godzilla and Citizen Kane this week. And part of it might just be that I am burned out with the state of politics in the world right now, and that is flavoring my Citizen Kane watch.
Sure.
But I'm connecting, I think, with this more. But this is close.
Yeah.
This is close. I personally love Citizen Kane. I know more than both of you, but I'm also giving it to Godzilla.
Yeah.
Okay. Max?
Wonderful. I hope that we never get to a point where we're too burnt out on nuclear kaiju that we can't watch Godzilla. I just really hope that
yeah.
I hope that doesn't happen. It doesn't feel out of the realm of possibility at this point. Yeah, I do really like this movie, and I do connect with it really well. I feel that I'm connecting it and understanding it in the way that it wants to be connected with and understood. Yeah, I think. Oh, yeah, I feel like I probably connect with this about to the same extent that I connect with Citizen Kane at this point in my life. I'm gonna give it to Godzilla as well, though, because I'm up on Godzilla right now. I'm just like really stoked about Godzilla, so I'm like, yeah. Let's give that. Parker.
Yeah, I think I would side with both of you guys as well. As somebody who respects the hell out of Citizen Kane and appreciates so much of what it is doing on a technical and cultural level, but just as an audience member, I just don't care, and I don't think I'm ever going to care, and I will keep trying. But yes, I do find myself connecting more with this. But
is that the first time you've been booed on our podcast?
I think it might be, but it won't be
by someone other than me.
I'm used to it. I'll double down. I'm fine with it. I don't care. I'm sorry. I don't.
Yeah, that's totally fine.
But yeah, so I think I would give this point to Godzilla, which does mean that our criteria states that it is one, taking a step back, an objective look. Do we think that Godzilla is better than Citizen Kane? And I have my piece of an argument, but I'm curious to hear from both of you.
I do think it's better. And this is as someone who does think Citizen Kane is one of the greatest movies of all time. And part of the main reason I picked this film is I wanted to pick a film that I think would actually be a serious contender, and I do think it is. I think this is one of the best films ever made, and I think it holds up. I think that its political bent is as sharp as ever, and I love it. I do. I think it edges out Citizen Kane.
Fantastic.
Max?
I'm unconvinced right now. I'm kind of back and forth, Parker. I want to hear your argument.
So, because I was also back and forth going into this, and I've been thinking about it all week, and I was thinking about it today, and I've been thinking about it while we're talking. And for me, I do think they're very comparable in a lot of ways. Like, genuinely, I do think these films are operating on very similar levels for me in a lot of ways, which is a testament to Godzilla, I think, because again, Citizen Kane is Citizen Kane. Like, it is. I fully agree with you. It is one of the greatest films ever made. I do think, and this is just, it's something that I think about a lot personally, as a writer and as a filmmaker, that I think it is always harder and more of a challenge to create a work that is like metaphorical and allegorical than it is to create an outright telling of what it is you want to talk about, right? And I think Citizen Kane talks about what it wants to talk about very well. And even if we've been teaching it wrong and have been approaching it wrong, like, the movie knows what it is. It's telling the story of this man. It's telling the story of fascism in America and all these things. I personally think that it is a grander feat to be able to take a giant lizard movie and have it be a politically sharp condemnation of nuclear weaponry 70 years on. I find that metaphorical storytelling that is this pointed and successful in what it is trying to analogize, I think is worth celebrating, and I think gives it the edge.
And this smart and this empathetic.
Totally. Exactly.
Because it could, like we were talking about earlier, it could have been so easy for this to be, retributive, to be a lot more angry than it is. And maybe that just comes from having lived in America, where it feels like there's a lot of anger behind a lot of films, especially films that are kind of come out of war.
Yeah.
But for this movie to be as pointed as it is and successful in its metaphor, while also being smart and emotional and a very successful giant lizard movie, I think is a testament.
Yeah, that's where I stand with it, is that, like, this is not a knock against Orson Welles. I'm sure if he took a stab at this, then, he would be successful in some regard. But, like, Citizen Kane doesn't use anything outside of what it wants to talk about what it's talking about. And I think that bad metaphor is easy, and people do it all the time, and good metaphor is hard. And this is a good metaphor, and it sticks to the landing, and I think that edges it out for me. So that's my argument.
Yeah. Good argument. Good discussion, y'all. Thank you.
Where do you land, though, Max?
Oh,
Yeah.
me? Who,
Yeah.
me?
Yeah, Max, you didn't
Who
say.
you?
Huh?
You didn't say.
I agree.
Hey, we got him.
Peer pressure.
And I think we should let Brogan say the
I think you
final
should.
word.
I think that clinches it. Godzilla 1954 is better than Citizen Kane.
You heard it here first, folks.
Thank you for specifying the year. We didn't want anyone to be like, 2014,
So
1998.
1998.
1998.
All
Which is
Godzilla.
really, the 1998 Godzilla film is so bad.
Yeah.
If you're gonna watch a Godzilla film, I do think the creature design for that is interesting.
Yeah, from what
Nothing
I've seen,
else
it's
works.
interesting, but it's interesting if it wasn't also Godzilla.
Yeah.
Well, and it's
In a
interesting
sense.
because we talked about they thought they almost started this film with like actual test footage. And I think both the 98 Godzilla film and the 2014 Godzilla film, the American films do that. And they're not nearly as powerful. I think the 2014 film was good.
Right.
But
Yeah.
it's I don't think it's on this level.
No.
Fair. Yeah.
Um,
Well, thank you so
well,
much for being here.
Yeah.
Exactly the words I was going to
Wow,
use.
verbatim.
In the
I gotcha.
exact order. Yes, Brogan, we're so glad that
It's
you
been
could
a
be
joy
here.
to have you.
It's been a long
Yeah.
time coming. Thank you
Thanks.
for bringing Godzilla.
Thanks for letting me talk about Godzilla. I hope this makes up for all the times I've yelled at Max about Citizen Kane.
It won't be the last.
It never. If I ever used the word yelling, I'm sorry. It never felt like yelling.
No, I just know I can be. I'm on the spectrum. I don't always realize how I'm coming across, but no, it is. I will say it has been so satisfying watching Max come full circle on Citizen Kane over the course of this podcast. It really has been so satisfying to see you come to a point where you're like, no, this is a really important film, and does deserve to be defended. And then it makes this Godzilla victory all the more sweet. I think if this had happened like earlier into your guys' run, would not have been as satisfying.
We wouldn't have earned it. But
Yeah.
we've earned it. Well, yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for coming on. We hope to have you on again sometime.
Yes.
Parker, would you like to tell everyone
Oh, I would
what movie
love
we're
to
covering
tell
next
everyone.
time?
Ladies and gentlemen, next time we get together, we will be covering 2022's epic RRR.
Yeah.
And I can't wait. Oh, I'm so excited.
You seen RRR, Brogan?
I have not seen it yet, but I'm shocked that y'all haven't done it yet because I know that you saw it multiple times.
Yeah.
We caught it in theaters in March of 2023, and first time we saw it we watched it together, and
I think it was
know.
my most watched movie
for a
in
while
for like in 2023 specifically. I think that year I watched it
You watched it like 6 times?
like 6 times. Yeah. Which is a feat for a 3-hour film.
It's not an easy feat.
No. So
Well,
good.
great.
I'm stoked.
Well,
I can't wait.
Yeah,
Well,
excited
thanks
for that.
as always, everyone, for tuning in. Had a wonderful time. Just looking
Yeah.
forward to next week.
Yeah, take care.
All right.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.